now, but we didn't have a personal injury class or an insurance law class back then. And again, there was no real internet. It was just starting back then. So I got to my first day and I was a little confused about the Insurance Act. And by the second day, I was wondering why everyone that was coming in was injured. Anyway, I realized what personal injury was pretty quickly. And I was like, oh my God, I'm actually an ambulance chaser. This is exactly what my parents did not want me to do. But I have fallen in love with it. It took me just a few weeks to realize that I'm so lucky that I got into an area that I enjoy, that I love. I interact with real people that genuinely need my help. They come to me in their greatest time of need. And while, people love to make fun of personal injury lawyers, I'm very proud of what I do. And there isn't a day that has gone by that I'm not excited to come to the office. And I've been practicing now for 15 years. My boss retired, I think about 3 years ago, just over 3 years ago. And at that time, I had to decide whether to join another firm, either as an associate or a partner, or start my own. And given the landscape of personal injury in recent years, I had no desire to start my own firm. The competition is intense and the dollars are also intense. And the risk is also pretty high. And I met all these other firms. And while I had really good opportunities with these firms, I'm thankful to say, and great individuals that I met during the course of my years as a lawyer that opened their doors to me and said, you're free to join us. And I thank them for that. I realized the importance of fit at that time. And I just didn't see myself in one of those firms. And it was time for me to grow up and open my own firm. And that's what I did 3 years ago. And I think it was the best decision I could have made at the time. I'm happy and still doing it. So that is my story in a nutshell.
Very cool. I just want to also add, or I guess give you the floor again to talk about, you have tons of initiatives outside of your traditional career. So you are a blogger, you have a podcast, you've written cookbooks, you have a fiction book. Do you want to talk a little bit about all of your projects?
You forgot the most fun and most
I was going
recent
to let you say
project.
that one.
So I'm the new owner of Pravda. I'm very proud of that. And I have a cookbook series too, which I'm really proud of. And that's really what sort of kickstarted things. Briefly, because I think we're going to talk about this a little bit more. But a few years ago, I I was frustrated in my job. Like I was actually at a cocktail party with lawyers. Um, and I was just talking to a lawyer friend of mine about how stressed out I was about this case I was working on and how my neck pain, it's like I have never ending neck pain and it's from doing this all day. But it was just flaring up and it wasn't subsiding and I didn't have time to work out. That's the only thing that will alleviate my pain. And I don't want to, mix Advil with drinking because that does not sound good. So I'm just suffering and he's not listening to me at all. And I finally said, I just wish I could cook. Like I enjoy cooking. It's such an outlet for me. I just wish I could just stop everything and cook. And he looks up from his phone because that's what he was doing because he always does that when he's talking to me. Um, and he says, well, why don't you? And I'm like, did you not hear anything that I just said? Like this case I'm working on and all this work I have to do. What do you mean just stop and cook? Like I have work to do and I've got bills to pay too. I have 3 children and they're expensive, plus, the day-to-day expenses. So what do you mean just cook? Like I can't do that right now. So anyway, fast forward, I leave this guy in the party. Ended up having a good time. I always have a good time at parties, but well, pre-pandemic parties. So I go home a week later. I'm still working on this case. And I distinctly remember I'm in my office and I'm doing this and my neck is hurting and my shoulders are hurting. And it's now going into my head into that headache sort of situation. And I looked up and I had this like light bulb moment where I'm like, well, why don't I? Who said that I had to be a lawyer and nothing else? Why can't I do all these other things that make me happy? And from then on, that's exactly what I've done. And that is what kickstarted JD in the Kitchen, which is my Indian cookbook series. And I have a blog page on Instagram and a website and all this stuff to go with it. And I've had a lot of fun with it. And then there was the podcast, and I have real estate investments on the side. And I wrote my chick lit novel, which is another story in and of itself. It's called Law Girls Bump in the Road, which I'm hoping will be a movie one day. We will see. Pravda was recent. And Pravda really was, I'm dying of boredom in this pandemic and looking for opportunities. And why not just buy a bar? How about that? For a real challenge. But yeah, I really believe that having these outside passions and projects and interests makes me a better lawyer, because it takes me away from the stresses that we endure day to day. And I come back with renewed energy and passion and excitement. And some of those days where you're kind of down about whatever you're working on, or stressed, or neck pain, or whatever the issue is, it kind of just goes away because you force your mind to think about something else that brings you a lot of happiness in a different way. So that's how it all happened.
Yeah, it's so funny. I feel like a lot of my friends right now, the thing that they're struggling with the most in the pandemic is their work is not completely drying up, but it's slowing down. And they're realizing that they don't have a lot of other outlets for their hours. So there's not a lot of like cultivated hobbies. So I think that's a really good kind of way to live, is just like, why can't you do that? Or why don't you do that?
Yeah, all because some guy said to me, well, why don't you?
Yeah. I mean, when he was half paying attention on his phone too.
Exactly. Yes. Words of wisdom from that boy.
Will, do you want to tell us your story?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kim. And thanks for giving me like the toughest act to follow. Because like there's no story that could top Jasmine's story. So I will do my sad attempt to fit into Jasmine's group here. But anyway, thanks for having me on this panel. I think it's, first of all, everything, a lot of the panelists have said so far, I think there's a real thread to all of our careers, and me for one, for sure, when I talk to younger lawyers or anybody about my career path, I never knew I would end up where I am today. So it's just, you cannot really plan your legal career in as much as you can't plan, your life for the curveballs that come, the twists and turns that come. And, I never foresaw that I would end up with the career I had or where I am today. So, I think, for the younger lawyers and for people that are going through, sort of a career revelation or, questioning where they are, things happen, universe happens, things happen, and you end up in places and spaces that you never thought you would. So, for me personally, I graduated, I got called to the bar in 1994. And it was in the middle of a huge recession. And actually, I will date myself, which I just did. Interest rates back in 1994 were like 18%. So, I started off doing, well, let me even backtrack there. After articling, I didn't get hired back. I went to the University of Windsor. I articled, did not have a job coming out of bar exams. And I also have a degree in economics, so I'm kind of an entrepreneur, a risk taker. So I got 3 other lawyers, two of whom went to law school with me, and another one we met during the bar exams. And none of us had jobs, so I wrote a business plan, went to the bank, we got a small business loan, we rented office space, and we threw up a shingle. And frankly, it was the greatest learning experience for me was sort of year 1 to year 7 when we had our little firm going, and we had basically no clients to start with. And before you know it, time goes by, the clients start coming out of the woodwork. You start building a brand for yourself. You start learning what it is to be a counselor, how to practice law on a day-to-day basis where you have to pay bills. And pay yourself somehow. And we did that for 7 years in a very small firm in North York. And around the 7-year mark is when I had my burnout phase, and where I had my first sort of career crisis, where I was, so busy. I was doing at that point a lot of real estate and corporate work, which is really what I wanted to do. I was also managing the firm, and that was, also stressful. And what you have in a small firm sometimes is, you have just small to medium-sized clients. And I always wanted to, experience what it would be working for a big company, having big clients, doing big deals. And I started thinking about what my next step would be. And I knew the small firm, while I loved it because I was never going to be a Bay Street person, Bay Street never attracted me at all. And I was very happy to have the small firm entrepreneurial experience to start my career, sort of winging it and flying by the seat of your pants. About year 7 is when, this is probably around 2000, 2001 now, we had a big, we also had the .com market was going strong. And one of my clients at that point was a startup.com. And I started getting into, in addition to real estate and corporate, I started doing some technology law at the time. It was just sort of the thing to do. And I've always been a geek that way. I ended up in one of my startup clients. They asked me if I wanted a piece of the pie and take an equity position, then come in-house as a business development legal guy. And I did it. So I kind of left my partnership, went in-house for a year and a half with this startup company. And I went from suits every day to basically shorts and golf shirts. And that was great because it's exactly what I needed to do at that point in my career. We did not make a dime for a year and a half. So that was really sort of back to the future at that point. But it was my first taste of in-house and sort of working for, one entity. And I was fortunate enough, after about a year and a half, the .com market had actually crashed by that time. Our venture capital had dried up, and we were all sort of stuck with a lot of what we thought was valuable IP that nobody wanted. And I started looking for a job because I didn't want to go back to a small firm or private practice, to be honest. And I was fortunate enough that Tim Hortons hired me. So I went in-house in 2003 to Tim Hortons. And that was my real first big taste of a large corporate entity doing, really excellent, sophisticated corporate work. And I was at Tim's for 3 years, and then McDonald's called me in 2005. And I've been at McDonald's ever since. So, if you look back on my career, which is probably now 26 years, I spent 18 of them in-house. Like I said, when I got out of law school with no job, I could not tell you that I would be here, 25 years ahead. And it doesn't feel like 25 years. It really doesn't. If you enjoy what you're doing, and I think Jasmine mentioned it, life is good if you enjoy your job, and you kind of sort of have to make the best of it. And all of us have gone through parts of our careers where, we were not happy and we had to look for different things. And, we all made decisions that maybe didn't work out so good, but that's the learning curve. That's sort of life. And so long as, you can, bounce back and, create and do things that actually you're passionate about, not things that just make you money, or not things that, just look good from an ego standpoint, but actually you have passion about, you're always going to be successful. So, I'm very fortunate in my career, and I'm very blessed, and obviously, this great panel too so far. I'm just hearing the stories of these wonderful women are very inspiring, because I feel that there's a lot of symmetry to my career as well.
Yeah, and I like that you mentioned that you weren't hired back, because I think for a lot of our membership, they tend to be in the kind of the 0 to 3 mark. And for a lot of people, that's a question we get all the time is, I wasn't hired back, is my career over? And I think that it never is, of course, but it's nice to hear like a firsthand account of someone who says that that's what they thought, and then like, look at where they are now. Catherine, do you want to tell us your story?
Yeah, wow. It's so interesting to hear all of these stories, and I wish all my clients could hear you, because it's so inspiring. And as Will said, there's a common theme here that who could ever have imagined where you'd end up? And I'm also, to continue on the theme, I mean, I've always said I have no idea how I ended up here, but I'm loving where I am. I started out in undergrad in math, thinking I was going to be an actuary because that's what my guidance counselor told me I should do. And after I graduated, it was sort of like, well, what am I going to do with this math degree? And am I going to teach and like Erin, I was like, okay, you know what, I'll just go to law school. At the time, I mean, I'm much older than all of you. It wasn't the crazy expensive endeavor it is now, which I feel for people with their student loans. And I went to law school, and, I don't know about the rest of you, but when you go to law school, you kind of just get funneled down this path of, you're supposed to go, where everybody goes. I went to U of T. U of T just funneled me. I ended up going to Bay Street without even really thinking about what I wanted to do. I ended up articling at Goodman's, which honestly was a great experience. It was fantastic. I got fantastic experience. It was terrific. It was pretty clear to me I wasn't probably meant to practice law, but I had immigrant parents who were so proud of having a lawyer as a daughter. Unlike you, Jasmine, they just were excited to have like anybody, so they were excited. And so I was lucky again enough to get hired back. And I, at the time, bar odds were after articling, I ended up getting pregnant and starting back as a first-year lawyer with a 6-month-old. And that was quite a thing. And so I every day thought, is this what I want? Is this, the life that I want? Again, talking about values, what makes me happy, as Erin mentioned, it really made me think. So I quit after a year. I didn't have another job. I was expecting my second child. My now ex-husband was graduating from med school, and the two of us thought, why not open up a walk-in clinic? Why not? Because now, so we did. And it's amazing that we did. We opened up a walk clinic. It was really successful. It was a lot of learning on the fly because neither of us knew how to run a business or knew what to do, but we figured it out. We figured out all of these things. It was nice to have friends in places. I remember one of the questions was, like, do we have to charge GST? And I could contact a tax lawyer that I knew. So it was great. And I actually was quite happy. I ended up having 4 kids and running the walking clinic. It was nice having my own business. And Goodman's called me up and at the time and said, I had done some work when I was a lawyer. I had done a lot of work with the student program. It was really what I loved. And they offered me a job as director of student programs, which I was so lucky. It was such a great job. So I love that. And part of my story is how the twists and turns of life impact you. It's not just about your career. So I was a director of student programs for a while at Goodman's. And as I mentioned, I had 4 kids. I was commuting quite a ways. I was living in Burlington at the time. My kids were done school at 2. Everybody thinks that when you're in a law adjacent professional development job, that it's pretty plum hours, but it's actually pretty busy hours. And I was really struggling with one of my kids. I was wondering, something's going on? And so I actually took a sabbatical. And this is a real plug for Goodman's because they were great to me. They were like, fine, go take some time off. I ended up getting, again, not at the risk of oversharing, ended up getting divorced at that time, which was a huge, life event that made you question. I think when we do have those life events like COVID, we start to think, what is important to us, what's meaningful to us. I started looking a little bit at what I wanted to do. Still wasn't sure and still was scared. Like, it's scary out there when you don't have a job, right? And so I was again lucky. I called up Goodman's and I was like, well, I'm ready to come back, even though somebody else has my job now. And they said, well, we're thinking of opening up, or starting up this alumni program. Why don't you come back? So I ended up coming back as director of alumni relations, and that gave me the piece, because as a student program, I loved working with the students. With the alumni portion, I loved the transition, seeing the associates transition to other things really made me think, right, that that there was a need to help people figure out what they want to do. I also at this point got really, really interested in equity, diversity, and inclusion at the firms. It was obvious again to me that, I think when I first started, I think I was the only person of color when I first started. It just, on Bay Street, it's pretty sparse, I should say. That's anyway. So I searched out a career coaching program that had both diversity and coaching, because those were the 2 areas following your passion, as Will said. Found one in DC, and the rest is history. I loved it. I felt like this was what I wanted to do. Started coaching on the side and just kept getting busier. And then I left to do it full time. And I think I just love it. I think it's really, really a wonderful thing to be able to help people figure out a little bit what they want to do, and support them as they do it.
That's awesome. Well, we're definitely going to benefit from your career coaching experience today, for sure. So I want to quickly go back to the chat and just get a feel for who our audience is today. Like I said, a lot of our membership is younger, but this was advertised as a mid-level event. So I just want to see kind of who's here with us today. So the first question is, how many people are actively job searching right now or are actively thinking about making a big career change? So you can, again, just answer in the comments. You can send it just to us, or you can raise your hand. Oh, someone just raised their hand. I didn't even know that was an option. Lots of raised hands. Yes, lots of raised hands. Okay. And how many people on the call right now are between work, either because you've been furloughed or for some other reason? And I'll be honest here too. I'm in that situation as well. I was furloughed a couple of months ago. Great. Okay. Yeah, we have some raised hands there. Okay. So obviously the reason we're all here today is because, like, whether we're actively looking for a job or if we're between work right now, which it seems like a lot of us are, is there seems to be a push to re-examine our careers in this pandemic and to some extent our lives. And I think, Catherine, you really said it best, where there's these twists and turns that come up that cause you to ask all these questions. And this is an interesting twist and turn because it's kind of happening to the entire world simultaneously. So, Catherine, I'm wondering if you can shed some light on what it is about a pandemic that fills us with these questions and kind of makes us want to take these big changes and big leaps.
So, I mean, I think it's the uncertainty that's all around us. Life feels uncertain, and we have so many emotions that make us question what we're doing, make us reevaluate what's important. You know, and I think a lot of us are saying, are you living like the best, most meaningful way? And on top of that, not only is the future uncertain, but we're inundated with negative news. And I think there's a lot of fear on top of the uncertainty leading, you know, and that leads to questioning, you know, how or where do you want to spend your life and what do you want to prioritize? And, you know, I mentioned, you know, some big life events that I had, and I think this is like a big life event, which throws us for a loop. And it creates a state of stress that everything we know is upended. And some people talk about it as going through the stages of grief, you know, and it's often at these times that we start to think more about our meaning and our purpose. I also think we just have more time to think. Mm-hmm. And some of us, you know, like, really do have a lot more time to think. And the last thing I say is that our routines are really disrupted. And I think we're prompted to get off autopilot. And that just makes us, at this point, we're off autopilot thinking, oh, life was just happening to me. Oh, right? Now what?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So, I mean, like, as a follow-up to that, and just at an absolute basic level, how do you actually assess if your career is working for you? And I know that's a kind of a loaded question, but you've obviously dealt with this a lot with your clients. So what are some of the questions that you have your clients ask themselves?
So before they even ask themselves any questions about their career, I think you need to focus on your well-being. That is the first thing. It's the foundation. I think you need patterns, routines to anchor you. You need to acknowledge the roller coaster of emotions. I think you need to focus on those things that are so important: sleep, exercise, meditation, gratitude, you know, the things that keep you healthy. It's also important to cut yourself a break during these times, you know, and not, like, allow yourself to, like, be human and not benchmark yourself against others or unrealistic superhuman standards. You know, stress, it affects you differently. And for example, there's two different ways. Like, it can make you make rash decisions. So I think you have to be careful for those people who are, you know, kind of lean that way, not to just approach this emotionally and do something rash. So that could mean slowing down. On the other side, I think status quo is often the default in times of uncertainty. And so threatening situations prompt us to behave very conservatively. And that's often the opposite of what's required when you're considering a career change. You know, Iris mentioned being risk averse. It's hard to dive wholeheartedly into reinventing your career if you're feeling risk averse or worried about your prospects. So that well-being piece, I think, is the foundation. And then I think the questions that you have to ask yourself, you have to get into self-reflection. You have to think about, what are your wants, needs, priorities, skills, accomplishments, achievements. You got to take stock of what you want to do moving forward? What do I want versus what should I do, right? That's a big question to ask yourself. What is it about my job that I enjoy? What's important to me? What does success mean to me? Like, what am I learning? What am I moving towards? And I think you should zoom out for, think 5, 10, 15 years down. What am I going to be proud of accomplishing? And so I think taking stock of that, the wants versus shoulds, it's important. It's also important to take stock of your priorities, right? Remember, work is only one. And this is so, Jasmine, I love when Jasmine said this, work is only one facet of your life. And you have other priorities. And so take stock of your priorities. You need to be able to think about what's in your control versus, and that will help you to stop feeling overwhelmed and miserable. And I have a client who actually said that to me. She said, once I realized that like I had something more in my life other than work, it somehow like lost its control over me. Right. And so, but often then your wants and your needs and your priorities are in conflict. You have to figure out how to balance them. And so that takes a lot of reflection, and you have to think about, not only what do I want, what do I need, but like, what do I have to offer? Like, I think you don't forget that you bring so much to the table, right? That's what I find with clients all the time. It's amazing. They'll come to me and half of what they're it's not on their resume, and they're just amazing people. And so I think that, takes, just think broadly about what you've done and what's successful for you. And then you got to talk to people, because if you only do the self-reflection piece, and do it alone, you can get stuck in analysis paralysis. So you need to get into active experimentation, talk to people, be honest with them and yourself, and write things down. Like, write down what's important to you. What are your, what we talked about, what are your wants, your needs, what are your priorities? How do you want to balance them when they're in conflict? Writing things down forces you to be specific instead of swirling in your head. And that's like really important. And, so you have to write down what's negotiable and non-negotiable for me. What is it that I absolutely need in my career right now? What are my values, as Erin mentioned? How am I living them now? Like, how do I want to live them? What's meaningful to me? And then make lists. Like, a list can also be your friend, right? To get, when you're really like, again, swirling in your head, write lists. Think about how you want to be more intentional about your life. Do I also need to focus, not just on well-being, but on confidence and speaking up? Like, what are some skills or new learning I want to get? Like, focus on the learning and not so much the outcome. And I know that's easy to say when you don't have a job, but really, given all of our experiences here that you've heard, that is the key, I think, to be open to possibilities, be open-minded, even in less uncertain times. Career change is never a perfectly linear process, as we've all, sort of are evidence of. It's a journey of exploration, and to do it right, you have to be open-minded. And the last thing I'm going to say is, like, mindset is the most important. Our minds lean to negative, so you have to remember that. You have to actively seek hope and possibility. Fear tips the scale, as I mentioned, to status quo and favor status quo. And so ask yourself, how is fear controlling my decisions? What happens if I don't put some intentionality into my career? Like, what will happen? Where will I be in 5, 10, 15 years if I don't do that? Right. And yeah, so that's, I think, cultivate knowledge, skills, resources, relationships. That's what I would say.
No, I think that's really helpful. And I really like the point you made about taking stock of your skills and also what you want. And I know, Iris, like, you actually made the transition during the pandemic. So you obviously went through that process of asking yourself questions and taking stock of, what you want and what you have to offer. So can you talk to us a little bit about that process and what were some of the questions that you asked yourself?
I would be happy to. I was going to say that, picking up on the theme of taking stock, and I certainly wished I had met Catherine much earlier, because I think my period of reflection would probably be much shorter. I spent a good, I would say, probably 9 months reflecting on this before I made the career move that I made. And I actually did write down some of the things that came to my mind. And over time, I revised that list. So I'm very happy to share that with this group. I think when I started down this path, I thought to myself, these are the things I need to think about. What do I do well? And what do I like doing? And what are the things that I can do a little bit better? I think it's important to think about and to decide for yourself what matters to you. And I think a couple of the panelists have already touched on this. What do you find meaningful, and what do you enjoy doing? What do you want to do, and what is right for you? It's different for different people. I think it's also important to think about the environment that you will thrive in. Some people like big firm settings. Some people like more entrepreneurial environment. Different people want different things. And I think that period of soul searching is important because it helps you consider and figure out what might be your next logical step and find that opportunity. And as Catherine has pointed out, it is nerve-wracking. It is a difficult process. And you have to dig really deep to find the confidence to pursue that ambition or that vision of what you want to be in, let's say, 5 years or 10 years. And then once you figure out what that vision is, what's also extremely important is to establish next steps and timing. What do you have in mind in terms of the next steps? And, I started this process pre-pandemic, and certainly pandemic threw a wrench and everything. And I have to recalibrate and course correct as I go. So that is, but I find that when I go back to all the basic questions that I ask myself, what do I do well? What can I do better? What do I not like doing? Those will be your North Stars. They will guide you in terms of your decision making. And as Catherine has mentioned, I think you need to do a lot of contemplating and reflecting before you jump into job searching or finding your next opportunity. And it's also extremely important to be honest with yourself and be who you are and do what's right for you, because ambition and success are a very personal decision. What works for you and what's right for you might not be right for somebody else. So you need to figure out what that is for you. And we've already talked about having honest conversations with yourself to determine what it is that you need to build on. And as Catherine pointed out, what can you change and what can you not change, and therefore you have to live with? And what do you really want in life? And as I said, everyone's circumstances are different. You have to make a decision that's not just right for yourself, but also for your family, because everybody's impacted by that. So it's important to stop and think. And I think the theme is take the time to become self-aware. And if things are slower at the moment, that's a great opportunity to do that. And take some actions to improve on what you believe you have to work on. And so what I would suggest is, if there is extra time now, instead of perhaps dwelling on the fact that there are not that many jobs out there, one of the things you can actively do is to take advantage of professional development opportunities and make an investment in yourself so that you're ready when the next opportunity comes up. And what I found very useful, at least for myself during this period of soul searching, is reaching out to my network. And what I meant by network is my mentors and sponsors. So seek advice from them, talk to them. Other people have gone through it too. And as Will and others have mentioned, no one's career is necessarily linear, and there are always ups and downs in everyone's career. And people are more than willing to chat with you, especially during pandemic times. I think what the pandemic has done is certainly bring out humanity. I've certainly seen a lot of messages on LinkedIn, encouraging people, if you've been furloughed or if you just need to chat, have a virtual coffee, reach out. And I think that's something that people are extremely open to doing during the pandemic. So take advantage of that. And I touched on this briefly. I think it's essential to network and to have a robust network. So examine your network, be strategic about it. Where do you need to add some contacts, in what area, at what level? And as I said, don't hesitate to ask people for time. I certainly have had people during the pandemic reaching out to me, asking me for a virtual coffee, and I've never once said no. People are open to doing that, and I think when you reach out and talk to people, don't be afraid to ask them to introduce you to someone they might know, even if there's not an immediate opportunity. they can perhaps point you in the right direction and advise you as to what are things that you should think about. I think one theme that's come through loud and clear among the panelists is don't just focus on the immediate situation, which is perhaps you've been furloughed at the moment. Plan your career for longer term success. And I would also say it's important to not only seek mentors in your network, but also maybe talk to other people who are dealing with the same issues and dealing with the same challenges. That's also hugely powerful. And what I would also say to people is pay the kindness forward. If one day you are on the opposite side and someone reaches out, I certainly would invite you to also pass it on and, you know, keep doing it. That's what you have to do. One other thing I would mention before I shut up, because I feel like I've been talking too long, is take the time to think about what your brand is. I think it's important to develop that brand and get into the market and develop some market presence. It takes a lot of work. It takes a huge amount of tenacity to do that, to build your brand. But again, it's along the lines of, I think, planning for your long-term success as opposed to just focusing on the immediate adversity or setback. And on that, I'll shut up.
Okay, there was so much good advice in there. I wish we had that like as a transcript that we can just send to everyone. I want to pull out a couple of things that you said because I don't want people to miss it. You made a really good point about, you know, using this time to do more CPD, focus on your professional development. I think that's so important. And I was speaking to someone the other day and they said something that I thought was really beautiful and really inspiring. They said, stop thinking about when the pandemic is going to end. Start thinking about who you want to be when we're out of this. And I thought that was so well put and just such a nice way to kind of spin that. Something else that you mentioned was building your personal brand. I'm going to do a small plug for YWL because we will have an event coming up that is going to be focused on building your personal brand. And the last thing that you mentioned that I really want to talk about is networking. So we obviously know networking is pretty much the most important thing to do when you're trying to get a job. Iris and I had a virtual coffee 2 weeks ago, which is how she's on the panel now. So we know it's really important, but it's also very difficult to do during these times. And what you just suggested, a virtual coffee, I think works really well. But I'm wondering, maybe we'll go to Erin for this one. Do you have any tips or strategies to effectively network during this time?
Sure. First, I want to say for those of you who think networking is a dirty word, it's not. I used to think that. I used to think, oh, I don't want to network. That sounds so schmoozy and so gross, but it's not. You just have to reframe it and think about it as just meeting people. You're just meeting people. You're getting your name out there by meeting people, and some of them become your friends. Some of them introduce you to opportunities, but the more people you meet, the more seeds you're sowing that may eventually sprout into a job or an opportunity for you. So don't think of networking as something to avoid. I'm an introvert. I thought networking meant going to cocktail parties and talking to a whole bunch of people, and I would hate it. Like when I was a new associate, I would go only if I knew someone else there, and we'd grab a drink and stand by the bar and not talk to anybody else. And that's pointless. So in the pandemic, your strategy is going to be a little bit different. Think of ways you can meet people that's more about who you are and how you want to meet people. So one way I find is social media is I feel like it's a network, it's like a cocktail party you can do in your pajamas because you're meeting, you're interacting with others, you're commenting on others' posts, you can read your tweet over 100 times before you hit send, unlike in a cocktail party where you may say something and then regret it. There's a whole bunch of plus sides to social media networking. So you can, I think LinkedIn is a really great way to get out there and network with people, but don't just lurk. Post helpful articles. If you're really interested in a certain area of law and you're looking for a family law associate position, post interesting articles about, like, find an article about family law or a new development, or write something. LinkedIn gives you an opportunity to publish posts on there. And if you publish something, not only do you get your name out there, they can see your writing skills, whether you can come up with a great case comment or not, which can lead to someone considering you for a job if you are looking for one right now. Another thing I would say is virtual coffees. I think we already mentioned that. I do virtual coffees all the time with new lawyers who reach out, and it's just like me sitting across from them at Starbucks. We have our coffee, we chat, I see their face, except I don't have to travel anywhere, so it's great. And like Iris said, at the end of the coffee, just say, you know, is there anyone else you think I should speak to? And then maybe you'll grow those networks and connections that you can talk to. And finally, I would say there are virtual networking events, and I know some of us are getting zoomed out, but Flex Legal we have a blog post. We keep up to date on virtual networking events. I think approach them as if you're approaching a real life networking event. So when they have the breakout rooms and you can chat with a couple of lawyers, you know, try and connect with them as if you're in person. Follow up with them afterwards. Get a chance to tell your story, but like, you don't have to sell yourself. Just kind of chit chat about whatever, the weather, and they'll kind of remember your name. And plus your name's going to be on there. So there's none of this, oh God, I forget that person's name. That's the one plus to having Zoom cocktail parties. So yeah, I think there's lots of opportunities. You just have to kind of reframe how you think about networking when you're doing it from your home office or bedroom or wherever.
I actually haven't heard of Zoom networking parties, so that's really interesting, and I'm definitely going to check out the blog. So I know for me, and I'm sure a few of the people that are on the webinar right now, one of the things with networking that I've kind of struggled with in the pandemic is talking about being furloughed. So as I mentioned, I was furloughed a couple of months ago. There's obviously some industries that have been hit harder than others. And I am currently in-house counsel at Live Nation. And because there are no live events in a pandemic, a bunch of our office was actually furloughed. So my question is, how open should you be about that? And how are employers viewing that? And I think I'll turn this one to Will and Jasmine, because I know you guys have both done some hiring in the pandemic. Whoever wants to start.
Will, do you want to go
Okay,
first so that you don't have the same issue?
Sure. Actually, look, I've just finished interviewing for one position, not a legal position, but a law clerk position. And I guess to your point, there's absolutely nothing wrong with being furloughed. I mean, it's just an economic reality of what businesses are going through. And I'll be honest, you know, this is such a timely topic. When we all got basically sent home back in March, and there was a ton of unknown and a ton of fear, there is not one person, no matter what year of call you were, how senior you were, or junior you were, that felt a career sort of crisis. Because I didn't know what McDonald's was going to do. Nobody did. When your business is shut and there's no revenues coming in, the first thing you think about is, you know, you're going to cut costs. And where do you cut costs? You cut costs with people. So all of us went through very traumatic beginning to the pandemic in terms of a negative outlook as to where this would go with your career. There's nothing wrong with being furloughed. I mean, if I were interviewing somebody or something, there's absolutely nothing. There's no stigma around it at all. Again, we were lucky that as a legal team, we were unaffected in terms of we didn't have to cut, head count. We don't know what that looks like going into 2021, obviously. But if you're interviewing or you want to be interviewed or you're networking, there's no stigma to saying you're furloughed. And I'd actually want to know. I think that's an important thing for a hiring manager to know. What your position is, where you are, what you've been doing. So very succinctly, there's nothing wrong with that at all. So I'll bump it to Jasmine and see if she has a different take.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that perspective. There is absolutely nothing wrong. And I also agree with the fact that every single lawyer, every single person, but we're talking about lawyers right now, we're impacted. And for me, there are some important qualities to someone I'm going to hire that I look at: trust, loyalty, honesty. Those are important characteristics. And if someone is not upfront with me about the fact that they were furloughed, we're not starting on the right foot. I want to know. And in fact, I am more inclined to help people that are in that situation because I want to give them a job because of their situation. I also believe that, like what we've heard, yeah, it did affect everyone. And on the flip side of things, I'm an employer. I had to lay off people. And I can't tell you how hard that day was for me personally. Of course, I'm sure it was worse for my staff, but I went home and was in tears. And I just felt, because I feel responsible for my employees, whether it's in this firm or in any of my businesses, I feel that I am responsible for their livelihood. And on that day, I crushed their livelihood. And it was not easy for me. And so, knowing how I feel on that side of things as an employer, if an employee came to me in that situation, they'd have my heart immediately. I would want to do everything I could to help them over someone who already has a job. No offense, people who have a job and are looking, but that's just my take. We're in a situation where we want to help people that need it most, and those are the people that have been furloughed.
I'm still muted. Sorry. Catherine, I was wondering if you've had to coach anyone in this situation. Like, have you had to have conversations with people that have been furloughed?
Not people who've been furloughed, but definitely people who have been, who haven't had a job. People who are furloughed, I think, are, in a better position. I actually think there's no stigma at all, right? But I've had clients who, I had one client who had gone traveling before, actually a few people, and then COVID hit and they didn't have a job. So things like that. So if people come to me, and ever ask me about being furloughed or having gaps, I actually say, this is the perfect time to have a gap. Everybody understands it right now. That's not, I know when you don't have a job, that's not much comfort. But there's a lot of stress around gaps on resumes that clients have. And this one shouldn't be one. I think people get it, right? People get that this is a tough time for everybody. And so there are people who didn't have jobs from before who are more worried. And even those I've had, the good news is I've had clients find jobs during this time. The people have interviewed virtually and found jobs virtually. People have found jobs at small firms. It's been more, I don't want to paint a rosy picture, but people have found jobs. And in terms of the people who have continued to network are the ones who found jobs. Like, typically that is the biggest piece for you. I think they estimate, some people estimate 70 to 85% of jobs are found through a connection. So don't discount, as Erin said, it is definitely not dirty. I'm also an introvert. I would never be one of those people that would be like, yay, let's go, and even when we had cocktail parties. But introverts actually network really effectively because they listen and they care and they connect, and that's what you want to do. And so I've had, it's funny, when COVID hit, I had two different types of clients. One that said, oh my God, let's put everything on pause because I don't know what's going to happen. And then there were the others that said, I'm going to keep going. And the ones that kept going found jobs. The ones that put everything on pause, there are some that are still on pause. Like, we have to, COVID is here. COVID is a reality. As much as we can, we have to be creative and think about life beyond COVID, whatever that means. Nobody knows what it is. So it's sort of, get ready, be adaptable. I would say in terms of networking, definitely keep going, and don't think of it as a one-way thing. It's a two-way street. It's about connections. It's not about finding a job. That's when people are running away from you when you say, get me a job, right? It's about connections. It's not transactional. And think about widely about, people, as Iris mentioned, like mentors and sponsors. Like, think about your dormant network, the people that you should be, that's often, I don't know, my whole life has been serendipity, people who I know. Even when my first, couple clients were from somebody who I hadn't talked to in 10 years. Like, so, you never know. Networking isn't about now. Networking is about connections forever. And I've had, people that I knew 10 years ago be really, really impactful in my life and my career. So.
Yeah. And you touched on, that you have had clients that have found jobs in this time. And I know Iris is the only one on our panel that has actually gone through the virtual job search interview process, onboarding process. She's now working at a firm where she's met everyone online. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what that was like and how that's working out.
So it's certainly been a very interesting journey for me. In the interest of full disclosure, I started before COVID, but very shortly into that process, COVID hit. And I kept going, similar to what Catherine has said. To me, I started and I finished what I started. So I kept going. And it's been interesting in the sense of, I think I have had different reactions from different firms and employers. Some, as Catherine indicated, immediately put a pause to hiring. Others were, going slower. I think you have to certainly expect to be more flexible in this process. And different employers will have different comfort level as to whether all interviews should be virtual or they want you in person. So as you pointed out, I have only met one person at Osler, and this was like shortly after I started Osler. Everybody else I just met online through a Zoom call like this. But there were others who certainly wanted to see me in person, especially in the later stages of the process. And so I've met people on a patio at a coffee shop. I've also met people at a boardroom sitting at opposite ends of a boardroom table. So like you have to be creative, and your employers will ask for some in-person meetings, or they might want all meetings to be virtual. You just have to go with the flow and be flexible. So I think that's one thing to think about in terms of the interview process. What I find actually interesting is in terms of meeting people virtually, in fact, I find it easier in a sense because you don't have to commute, especially if you are in a current position and you don't want it to be too obvious to your colleagues that you are interviewing. Is relatively easy because you book the time in your calendar and you turn off your work computer and you sign in virtually using your personal computer. So that also helps, in terms of the job search. The onboarding I find very interesting because, as I said, I've only been at Osler for a month, and I went into the firm, but the firm, for the most part, has been shut down. There are very few people there, and so I can't walk the halls or walk the floors to meet people. And so what I've been doing is similar to what we talked about. For networking, I've been sending emails to people and say, hi, I've arrived. Like, are you interested in having virtual coffee with me? And again, you have to be flexible. Some people like virtual coffee, some people like virtual wine. And you just have to go with the flow and be creative in how you reach out to people. And, certainly I have found, based on my personal experience, people understand at a certain level that it's hard to get onboarded and it's hard to start a job virtually. So people will try to go the extra mile to welcome you and onboard you. So be creative in your approach. I think similar to what Catherine and Erin said, I'm also an introvert, so I find it extremely hard to reach out to people and do a little spiel about myself and what I do. But be authentic. I think Catherine touched on this point. Introverts and extroverts network very differently. Do what you're comfortable with and go for it. Like, be fearless. That would be my advice.
That's great advice. I think one of the hardest things that people are finding about the pandemic is that, again, we just don't know when it's going to end. So it's really, like you said, it's really important to be creative, and there's all these creative solutions happening in office spaces right now. We just don't know when it's going to end or when we're ever going to be back into an office, which is kind of strange because so much of job searching is focused on culture and fit and what the work environment is like. And that's kind of changed on the side of the people that are doing the job searching. So I'm wondering, for people that are doing the hiring, has anything changed in terms of assessing potential hires? So for example, because most offices are fully remote now and will be for the foreseeable future, are you starting to consider more out of town hires, like a bigger pool of hires? Again, I'll go back to Will and Jasmine on this because I know you guys have done hiring in this time.
So here's my advice to the audience. screw the pandemic. And by screw, I actually want to use a stronger word, but I'm behaving, okay? What I want you to realize is that it is going to pass and it is going to end. And yes, we don't know when, but it will pass. And why am I saying this? I'm saying this because of a few reasons, but in terms of interviewing, I feel that a lot of people are starting to think that, oh, we just walk around in our sweatpants all day, so we're just going to take this interview or opportunity in that sort of relaxed, casual manner. No, wrong approach. You need to be on, just like you were in pre-pandemic. So when I'm interviewing, and I actually, this was mentioned, I hired an articling student. She started, I don't know when she's like, I don't know, whenever, a few weeks ago, a month ago, I don't know, the days have all sort of gone together in my head, but very recently. And I found her through LinkedIn. So I put up a post on LinkedIn. Oh, I don't know if that's something cutting into my sound, but I put up a post on LinkedIn, and it was through the LinkedIn network that I got all these applications. And I usually don't hire so late. The issue is that I usually hire in January, February, and I ended up being really busy at that time. And my office manager was giving me applications and I didn't look. And then I went away for my birthday trip. And then I came back from Miami and I'm like, okay, I'm going to pay attention to these applications. And then we were in a pandemic. So then I just put all the applications aside. And fast forward, there was a lot that happened during the pandemic, different phases. First, everything canceled. There was nothing to do. I started getting very concerned because our revenues dropped. I got more concerned because we have no new clients because nobody's getting injured because everyone's at home doing nothing. So this is all, good for the world, not good for me and my firm. And so I'm like, okay, what do we do here? I have staff I had to lay off, and then things started opening up again. Phase 1, phase 2, all this. So this all helped. And then fast forward, most of the people have come back to work, and then it comes to, okay, I'm going to hire an articling student because I believe in education and I've always had an articling student and I want to give back, and that's my way of doing it. I also need an articling student because who's going to do all these motion records? And so I'm going to hire. So I hired through LinkedIn, and the interview was conducted virtually. But in my interview, I said to the candidates, I want to be very upfront with you because that is how I am. You will need to come to the office. And if you are not comfortable with that, that is completely fine. I will not ever hold that against you, but I need to know because that right away is not the right fit. And so we can talk more about why that is. If anyone wants to. But it did end up that we have an individual who her comfort level is not like super high with the COVID situation, nor should it be. But she has an area of the office and she wears a mask and she feels comfortable in her own space, and we're in a self-contained building. But I was upfront with that. And going back to the real question here, which is interviewing, do it like you would do an interview pre-pandemic. I mean, the job is the same. Pandemic is going to end. The practice of law, like we had to catch up on how to work remotely and do all that. But I can tell you that I am back to full speed. And I've also taken on all these other projects because I was bored. So now I'm even busier than I was pre-pandemic, if that's even possible. So yes, work like there's no pandemic, interview like there's no pandemic, and the sky's the limit.
I was going to say I would raise my hand. I certainly interviewed like I would interview in person. So, full makeup, suit and everything, even though the interviewer might be in more casual clothes. I think it's important to do that because first impressions do matter. So I agree absolutely 100% with what Jasmine has just said. Interview as if you're interviewing in person.
I just want to jump in and say one thing that I'm hearing, if you don't mind, is that the period of interviews is being extended. So be prepared, it's not the same as when it used to be like they get back to you right away or get back, like the time in between is taking longer. More interviews, unfortunately, I'm hearing sometimes. And and I just wanted to touch what Iris said too, is what I'm hearing, people are having more time to network and interview. It's like, I don't need to, my boss doesn't need to know. So those are some of the good things. And also small firms are asking people to come in for interviews. That's also what I'm hearing, but it's mostly the smaller firms, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with what everybody says. I think what we're seeing is a real evolution, though, in the process and in hiring. So, from my point of view, obviously it was very traditional. Our legal team is based in Toronto, so there was an expectation that if you were going to be part of our team, you'd be working out of the Toronto office, and if you weren't willing to relocate, then you weren't really going to be considered as a candidate. The last 6 months have really turned all of that on its head. So, we were I'm going to say we were a quasi-permissive work from home culture where, hey, sure, you can work from home a day, every couple of weeks, but really it was more of a traditional, yeah, there's an expectation unsaid, but we wanted people to be in the office. And then that light bulb was switched off overnight. And it was a real realization, I guess, for everyone from the top down that people could actually work from home very productively and efficiently, and that you could still have the same sort of contact with your teams virtually as you would if they were coming into the office. And, I want to echo again what Jasmine and Iris and Catherine said about the interview process. I mean, there's because you're doing it virtually does not mean you're going to be unprofessional about how you go about doing it. So, I think that sort of, and to be honest, the people I've interviewed have been, top notch. They've showed up on camera, very, prepared, very professional, and, a real testament to sort of how they approached the process. But things have changed. And I think for a lot of people that I talk to, in other legal departments, in-house especially, I think the sentiment is, there's breadth to take on talent that is remote now. So even for this position that I was hiring for, I interviewed 2 people from Montreal that would not have been in the mix, actually, pre-pandemic, because now, I think there's a little bit of of breadth to say, you can work from home, and if we need you to come into the office, we'll make a space for you in the Montreal office. And I think that will open doors for a lot of people. If there's one sort of positive side to this, is that evolution in hiring that I think is going to be, permeating through a lot of companies. I think if you're smart, you're going to look for candidates who are the best fit and who don't necessarily have to be the best fit in a physical environment in your office. And I do agree that the pandemic at some point will be over, or at least not where we are today, where offices will reopen. But you know what, they're going to reopen, and if the person comes in, 2 days a week or comes into a satellite office, then that's just as good. We really did see a fast forward in terms of corporate philosophy when it comes to that work from home sentiment and attitude and permissiveness. And I think the biggest thing for us now is really on the mental health aspect of all our people that are working from home. It is top of mind every week for me, for my people on my team, and certainly for the company as a whole. And it's really top of mind now as we go into winter. I think onboarding, to Iris's point, is challenging. Me, I'm a sort of face-to-face person. I did manage to do a few interviews on a patio over coffee, which was fantastic. But really getting somebody integrated into your business, into the corporate culture, into their job, really, is going to be challenging when you're doing it remotely. Because a lot of what we do, especially in-house, where you've got client groups that are very tightly, closely knit, and you really want your person to be attending meetings, building relationships. It's harder to do virtually. So we're gonna just we're gonna work with that, see how that plays itself out over the next few months. But I think there's opportunities to be had now. And I think any employer that would not consider, a lawyer who is in Vancouver, but is, a perfect fit, is kind of silly. So, we have moved down a path that will be different for a lot of companies. So, I think there's opportunity out there for everyone.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And I think that will help people who are looking right now to kind of expand their net a little bit. So, okay, I'm really mindful of the time, but we have a lot of questions coming in. Is everyone okay if we go a little bit over time? Yeah, ish. Okay. Okay. We'll try not to go too far over, but I want to ask one last question about the actual like hiring process and the negotiation of salary in COVID. So obviously, as we all know, a bunch of industries have been hit really hard. Is there an expectation when you're negotiating salary that salaries will be lower because of this pandemic? Is it appropriate to ask if the company plans on doing salary cuts or, you know, has done salary cuts or anything like that? Or is there an opportunity to have a conversation about, you know, we can renegotiate salary earlier than that year mark, which it usually happens in, and anyone can kind of take this one. Will.
I think that
Jasmine.
with the, yeah, I'm like hesitant because no one's gonna like my answer. But I think right now, for people that are looking for a job, get a freaking job and prove yourself, and then have the salary discussion. As an employer, and as someone, remember, I wasn't always an employer. I was an employee for many years. And what I learned as an employee is that if I show that I'm good and that they need me, then they're going to keep paying me well or give me raises or giving me bonuses. And that's what happened for me. I went from student to associate to partner to name partner to I took over the damn firm. And how did that happen? Because I worked hard. And over time, it just flowed, because when people are happy with your work, when I'm happy with someone's work, I want to show my appreciation. I want to do more for them. I want to pay them more. But if someone comes to me right out of the gate and is starting to talk to me about salary, it's almost off-putting. And I hate saying that, because I know that sometimes that's not the intention of the person, that they're just looking for a fair deal. But right now, it's really hard for a small business such as mine. The revenues have taken a huge hit. Like, there was a few months where there wasn't any revenue. Like, I'm on contingency fee. So like the ads say, we don't get paid till we settle. So if we're not settling, we're not making money. And that was the truth. We weren't, nothing was happening. We had nothing happening for, over a month, because everyone had to figure out how to do remote work. So, and the courts were closed, and the courts they're supposedly open, but I can tell you they're not open. So the point is that the firm is not generating what it used to. And so while I want to pay people, I can only pay what I can afford to pay. And, if someone's starting to talk to me about their salary and other things right at the get-go, I remember I have also hundreds of people that are willing to take the job. And I'm not trying to sound harsh. That's why I said this is not going to be an answer anyone likes, but there's a lot of people looking for jobs out there, number one. Number two, prove yourself and you will get. I think that's really the way it works. And I think that over time with generations, it's becoming forgotten.
I have a slightly different take on this question. I think the salary is all but one of the factors to consider. I think if the pay is generally fair, but there's something to learn from the opportunity, I would say that in itself is way more important than negotiating whether it's a bump in the salary or something else. Like, I think you have to take the whole opportunity as a whole and not just focus on the salary. That would be my take on that question.
Yeah, I'm going to totally agree with that. I mean, I feel it personally too, as you go through your careers and as you get to different stages in your careers, you'll realize that salary is probably third on your list of what's really important. I talk to a lot of students, a lot of young lawyers about interviewing. And I understand that there's different financial pressures and economic pressures, obviously, when you're young and you're into your career. But you will soon realize that the value proposition in a long career is really in, the place you land. It's about their values. It's about how well you fit in to that. If it's in-house, for instance, which I will speak to, is, what is the value proposition that you bring to the company, and what will the company give you in return? Are you going to be a fit from a philosophy standpoint, how they manage the department, how they practice? And really, this all ladders up into obviously job satisfaction and happiness, which compensation obviously is part of, but it is just a part of it. So I'm totally on board with Iris in terms of it's part of the equation, not all. And I'll go back to the question, Kim, that you had, which, we're still in a bunch of, uncertain times here. So, Jasmine is a great sort of counterpoint as a small firm, business owner versus, a corporate department like ours. We will have a budget, for 2020 or for a head count that's going to be assured for a period of time. If that budget changes in 2021, 2022, we're going to have to do something, whether, we don't know what that might be. But I would encourage anybody who's interviewing, obviously, it is a bit of a buyer's market because there's lots of people looking for jobs. I totally agree. Don't put salary as your number one criteria. Make yourself, to Jasmine's point, even to Iris's point, make yourself a valuable commodity that goes beyond, how cheap you come or how expensive you come. If you can show your value proposition to the department, and salary will come in time. There's no question about it. So, like you said, get in the door first of all. Just get in the door, and then be smart about it. You're a lawyer, of course. Negotiate salary, milestones or renegotiation points. Peg your salary at how good the company is doing. Take a swing. Say, listen, if a company is doing bad, I'd rather just take a pay cut than lose my job. So, build in something that says, I'm willing to take a 30% pay cut if things go wrong just to keep my job. But if things go good and the company's hitting its targets, I think we need to look at giving me a pay bump because I came in under market. So be creative. That's what some hiring managers like me, I would love for somebody to come prepared to talk about, the realities of what's happening now, and not just say, sorry, this is really what I want. And, too bad if you can't do it.
I'm just going to add one thing. I'm sorry about the dogs barking in the background. I would have a different answer. I would say it depends. I think it really depends on the person, and it depends on where they're interviewing. I remember salary is only one piece of compensation. I think it's really important to understand what all of the compensation is, what the intention is. I do think that there are people, yes, there are a lot of candidates out there, but there's some amazing candidates out there, right? Who, and they know their worth. And so I would say it depends. I would say it really, sometimes it's okay to ask, and it's how you ask. And that's a conversation that there's no one size fits all. That's all.
No, I think that's all great advice. I mean, I think at the bare minimum, you have to remember, don't take a job that's below your means. Of course, have your basic means covered and then kind of go into these conversations. So again, I'm super mindful of the time. If people do have to go, I just want to quickly say thank you so much for attending. But we do have a bunch of audience questions that are coming in that are people specific. So I want to go through a couple of those before I let you all go for the evening, if that's okay with everyone. Okay, so this is a question for Catherine. How did you know that practicing law wasn't for you? How did you find the transition process? I moved from private practice after 3 years to in-house, and while I'm appreciating the more predictable hours, I'm not enjoying the day-to-day. Have you ever had any clients grow to like practicing later on in their careers?
I'll answer the second part first. I've absolutely seen clients grow to liking practicing in their careers. Yes, 100%. I think that there is, I think first year practice is overwhelming for everybody. I think it's sort of this incompetence that you feel is overwhelming. And once that you start to feel like a little bit more competent, it's amazing how there's things you actually like more. For me personally, it wasn't that I just felt incompetent. I did feel incompetent. I also just felt like this was just not me. I was never, I looked up at partners. There was nothing about a partnership, being a partner in a firm that attracted me, not one little bit. Like there was nobody that I thought that's who I want to be like. It was just clear to me from, I really had to trust my gut. And I think that's really, I think people have mentioned that before. I really had faith that everything would work out for me, that I was capable, I was competent, I would find something that I could do. and it didn't have to be law. And the question I get asked by clients all the time is, oh my God, I spent so long doing law, I can't leave now. And I'm like, I'm still glad I did my law degree. Isn't that funny? And I'm still glad I did my math degree. It's funny when Erin mentioned career mistakes, I actually wonder, are they really career mistakes? Were they just learnings, right? So, I mean, how did I know? I hated it every day. If I'm going to be really honest with you, I hated it with every bone of my body. I hated corporate law. I was like, I was not meant to be a corporate lawyer. Maybe there's another kind of law out there for me, but this is not it. I hate it with every bone in my body.
I can't unmute myself. Thank you for that. I hope that answer was helpful, and I hope that person's question was answered. I'm seeing a lot of the questions have kind of similar themes about this private practice versus in-house, which is the age-old conversation in any question in your career panel. So we know kind of the basic pros and cons of private practice and in-house, but has the pandemic changed any of that? And so I'm going to kind of give some color to that question a little bit. But for example, if you're thinking about going to private practice, has anything about consideration for partnership changed? Is the path to partnership longer? Have you guys seen any differences in that conversation between in-house and private practice? And I'm going to go to Iris for this one, because this was technically directed to Iris because you made the switch that most people don't make, which is from in-house to private practice.
I think given I'm relatively new to the firm, I don't know if the path has changed, but I certainly think that people have to be open to other possibilities. I know that some firms, I'm not necessarily speaking on behalf of my firm, but I know that some firms, whether as smaller firms or mid-sized firms, also have experienced the dip in the revenues or the dip in the work. So, and that would most certainly likely impact the path to partnership. And what I would encourage people to do if they are at that crossroad is to have open conversations with people at the firm as to what to expect. I think that's important to know, and what the expectations might be. But I also echo some of the comments that other panelists have made. The pandemic will pass. Eventually, we will return to normal. Is a question of whether it's going to be next month or 6 months from now. So I think it's important to have that conversation with people at the firm, if that's something that you are aiming for in the longer run, and be proactive in maybe coming up with a career path or a plan as to how to work towards that goal, and also take into account, depending on how long the pandemic lasts, that might also need to be tweaked and recalibrated over time. So I would say, have an open mind and be prepared for different paths, like whether it's straight to partnership or other options. I think that's something to be considered and to be discussed with the firm.
Perfect. Okay, there's a bunch of questions, but I'm going to pick 2 more and then let you guys go. Beyond the networking recommendation, what other suggestions do you have for highlighting yourself in an application, given that there are so many other people applying right now? Anyone can go, free for all.
I'll start. I just having gone through the process myself, look, we had so many applications for this one particular position. And for me personally, I'm working in tandem with my talent manager in the HR department, who is usually the intake person. So there's a little bit of already have a hurdle there, because the intake people sometimes in the HR department don't identify, legal talent as well as the lawyers do. So when there's 150 applicants through LinkedIn and they do a first pass, and they start, carving out people and then putting people in the bucket, say, hey, well, here's good people. I've always gone back and looked at all the people that they've thrown out, because they always throw out good people. And I think, the differentiator usually is, and what sells it for the HR person, is they've been either creative on their cover letter, or you know, the way they've laid out, you know, their resume, or their initial first take in terms of connection with the company is something that obviously catches the eye of the talent manager. And then, you know, when I look at resumes, frankly, to be honest, what I want to see is passion. I want to see, you know, why is it that you want this job? And it's not just that you don't have a job and you've just thrown, you know, you've casted your net and you're trying to catch, you know, whatever job you have. For me, what really comes out, if somebody's passionate about wanting to work in our department or for our brand, it comes across in their email or in their cover letter, and they'll usually go an extra step, you know, and I have absolutely no problem, and I don't know why anyone should feel, you know, reluctant. Yeah, you know what, message me on LinkedIn. Say, hey, you know, Will, I see you have a job. You know, this is where I am. Can I just grab 5 minutes of your time, or, you know, a virtual coffee, just to, you know, help me understand sort of what you're looking for. I don't mind that at all. It shows a little bit of enthusiasm. It separates you from, you know, a lot of people who may be too shy or may not want to take that extra effort. And it's those little things in my mind that goes a long way to sort of, you know, separating the people that are actually passionate about the gig and want to advance their careers, and people that just do the traditional thing of, here's a form cover letter, here's my form resume. And look, that's just my personal take. I'm sure Erin, you know, Catherine, who are, you know, the professionals in this piece may have a different take, but that's just for me with a hiring manager lens on.
I agree with that. I look at all of that too, like who just changed my name on the cover letter. But one other thing I also look at that always piques my interest is when you have a letter of recommendation from someone, whether it's a professor, whether it's a former employer, just someone that's advocating for you, because like someone has to actually sign their name and put something. And if it has, you know, a little bit of a personal touch to it, I'm really interested to meet this person because someone actually vouched for you. It wasn't just the standard application. So, you know, going that extra mile and finding someone that will vouch for you is something I look at.
Awesome.
Yeah, and the last thing I would add is make sure you, as Will said, as Jasmine said, like, you know, show the passion, show that you're, you know, that you have the skills, but connect the dots. Like a lot of times people, you know, as Jasmine said, don't just change the name, but also don't just have a standard cover letter that you send to everybody, because you need to tell them why you can do the job, like why you would be great for the job, why you're interested in the job, instead of just regurgitating all of the things that you've done and expecting them to extrapolate. And so that's really important to connect the dots to the job posting.
So Jasmine, you briefly mentioned reference letters, and we actually got a question about a reference letter. I'm going to make this our last question. I feel so bad that there's some unanswered ones, but I've written them down and hopefully I can get some insight from you guys and pass them on to our attendees. Someone asked, if you're searching for a job as a junior lawyer, she just finished her first year, what do you do about references if you're applying and job searching confidentially?
You don't have to get it from an employer. That's, I think, also something to consider. You can get it from a law school professor. I even look at, I don't know, maybe other lawyers look at different things, but if you've had a job somewhere else and that's outside of law and someone thought you were a great employee, why not get them to say, look, she was a manager for my store for every summer throughout law school or throughout undergrad and law school. Like that shows someone who was loyal to this employer for so many years. You know, I look at that and say, well, that's someone I'd like. You can even put in your cover letter, I'm applying confidentially, and therefore I didn't ask my current employer, but I have supplied you with a letter from someone else. There's no standard form. I mean, yes, there's the basics, your CV, your resume, your cover letter, your transcripts, yes. But adding those little touches, a letter, again, it could be from anyone, like not a family member or a neighbor. Okay, no, negative. But like, as I said, even an employer that was outside of law, I would look at that as favorable if it has those characteristics that I mentioned.
Perfect. Okay, I did lie. I'm going to ask one more question because I feel like, Erin, you will be able to answer this one really well. How do you keep in touch with people that you meet at networking events after the initial coffee? It sometimes feels like I have nothing to offer them and I don't know how to keep in touch after the first meeting.
Yeah, you have to be mindful of people's time. I wrote an article a few years ago for Precedent Magazine called Networking Coffees from Hell. And it's based on my experiences of people monopolizing my time. I love to give freely, but you have to be cognizant that we're all busy lawyers and we have other things going on. So I think it's great to want to be in contact with this person after an initial coffee, but don't like expect, a weekly catch up. I think there's no harm in reaching out and saying, can I touch base with you again in a couple of months or a month? And we can talk about my career progress and maybe of other opportunities that have come up. That's happened to me lots. And I said, sure, like just reach out in a month's time. And if I'm too busy, I'll let you know. But I think just, unless you're looking for someone who's more of a one-on-one mentor or coach or sponsor who's going to set up regular times with you, I think it's just a periodic kind of just ask. And if they're too busy, they'll tell you or they'll ignore your email. And you know what? Just let it go and then try again with someone else. But I think I don't know if anyone else has any other advice on that.
I do want to say, remember, it's not a one-way street. Like that's what I mentioned before. Like sometimes, Erin, I'm sure this has happened. It's happened with me where I've connected with somebody, we talked about something and they send me an article after, or they send me a podcast after. Like if they remember that I love podcasts and they send me an amazing podcast recommendation, like I love that. So really, again, it's about listening. And that, again, when I go back to that, listening, connecting, and then following up. And also if they said to you, you should talk to so-and-so, there's a perfect touch point. Right after you talk to so-and-so, circle back and just say, Erin, I just want to say thanks so much for, suggesting that. It was so helpful, da, da, da. You're now in Erin's mind again. She feels good that she, did, connected you and it worked out. So remember that it's not just take. It's about give too.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you guys so much. I know we went significantly over time here, but I think it was a really helpful conversation. It seems like there's a lot of engagement. So I hope the attendees took something from it as well. Thank you to our panelists. I think this was great. And please, if you have any more questions or feedback, you can send questions and feedback to info@youngwomeninlaw.com and we will try our best to answer those questions. Our next event, our much anticipated speed mentoring event, will be in early November. So look out for those details coming soon. And thank you all. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Nice meeting everyone.
Bye.
Bye.